Hey all, Cold here. You remember those times late night as a kid back then? Loading up your favorite console with your favorite game? You expect the usual comforting startup of your console, but then something goes wrong, and you see something you couldn't possibly expect, something that your child brain couldn't even comprehend, and it leaves something to really be remembered. I'm aware that not everyone has experienced something like this, however, I'd still say it's intriguing to most people, as errors vary extremely because it depends on what hardware you saw it on. And anyone who has seen an error from a system has a different story to tell. It's what makes it so interesting. But from a young age, I've always been so fascinated with errors or kill screens, whatever you'd like to call them. But just seeing software express that something is wrong, it makes for a complete tone shift, that familiarity being stripped away for only a mere moment. If that makes sense. The prime example of this topic would be the PlayStation family, as they are home to the tradition of red screens of death, which you'll see as I go over them, and are just the most iconic, I feel. But before diving right into the errors, I'd like to explain the aura of different interfaces. So for the PS1, it felt like this weird ancient CD player, but then the PS2 really satisfied my love for like space and stuff, as it was like this strange version of space that was just like inside your console, which is just fucking awesome. Then the PS3 was this neat thing with the X and B and sound design. Not as interesting as the PS2, but still its own thing, which I can respect. Plus, the customizability of the PS3 home menu is still yet to be topped to this day. Then the PS4. This one sucks. It's really boring and lame and uninspired. Thankfully, they made this one limited free theme which was a callback to all the previous systems, which was really cool. I always ran that one personally. But the PS4's interface is really garbage compared to all of the other interfaces that Sony has made over the years. Well, at least in terms of aesthetics and flashiness. And with the long wait for the PS5, I wanted its interface to be more captivating and still was kind of disappointed with the sound design and looks of it, but it still was a step up from the PS4 definitely, and it did start to grow on me over time, I must admit. Anyways, now for the actual errors. To start, the PSX, or better known as the To start, here is the first ever red screen of death. Then, there are these two different startup sequences due to errors. So well known for the eeriness they give off, they even have names. That being Personified Fear and Fearful Harmony. Personified Fear is caused when the PlayStation attempts to read a disc it cannot read but still tries to, and it causes it to crash on the transition to the white screen to the black screen. And the sound that plays in the transition is a glass breaking sound that is stored in the BIOS, but normally it gets cut off, except for when Personified Fear happens. So here's what that looks like in full. I like this one. It leaves you on edge. Also, fun fact, the gray screen is what the PlayStation displays when there's literally nothing that it can display in the BIOS menu. Then there's Fearful Harmony. It is supposedly only caused when a PlayStation with a mod chip tries to read a disc with no game data. The sound is actually technically different every time due to this error causing the PlayStation to slow down immensely while the startup plays, until it crashes. The speed of the slowdown depends on what non-game disc was inserted, so here's what that looks like. Yeah, that one's pretty trippy. Here's another example, however, just to show how this error can really vary, though I'm not going to play these in full because this is already the longest error that I have to show. That's all I have to share for the original PlayStation, however. Though, just imagine trying to play a game and you just see one of those errors pop up. It's kind of like spooky, you know? Onto the PS2, my personal favorite. To begin, the second red screen of death. The most iconic one and the one with the most vivid sound design and imagery. And most people are probably familiar with this already, but it's still very important, so I'm going to show it anyway. This is unscripted, but I would like to take some time just to appreciate the ambience of the PS2. I really like how they use the sounds of the ocean, as the ocean is like a totally vivid experience, and the sounds can be really relaxing but also quite off-putting, like with the red screen of death. So I think using the sounds of the ocean was quite interesting, as it quite fits the feeling of the interface, but also it is really cool because it still has that space look to it. There's just something about the aura of these interfaces. Can't quite describe it though. And to anyone who doesn't really know the context, it sounds quite crazy. But it's just something about this, it's just quite indescribable. Though, do you remember how back in the day people would use the PlayStation 2 to play movies or music? Back then, it was really common. I remember using the music player a whole lot. If you tried playing the movie, you could sometimes get this really rare error screen. Now, there are three more variations to this error. They only have slightly different text and backgrounds, so I'm only going to show those for examples. But for something totally different, you know the PS2's internal clock? Some games even use it, like Metal Gear Solid 3. But the internal clock is powered by the CMOS battery, and let's say it died. Now, it has a really interesting effect, and here's what it looks like. Pretty eerie, huh? For whatever reason, the orbs are dependent on the CMOS battery for them to orbit around, so it's as if they turn into a big glowing eye just staring at the user. And another effect of this is that the time is completely unable to be changed or tweaked, so it really just gives this off feeling. Special shout out and thank you to BK for some of the footage, as that was the only footage that was even on the internet of some of these errors, so I literally had to just take those and put in the video to show them off. And well, that's about all for the PS2 now. Let's move on to the PS3, but this is where errors kind of become more just text on a screen, and they're a little less interesting, more just like, oh, okay, kind of thing, you know? But a lot of them are still interesting in their own right. And there's the third red screen of death. The other errors are kind of nothing burgers, just things like cannot start, the appropriate system storage was not found, and stuff like that. Shoutouts to the yellow light of death though for breaking my first ever jailbroken PS3. Speaking of lights of death, there are actually three. Green light of death, yellow light of death, and a red light of death. Then here's another kill screen for the PS3. You know the red screen of death? What about a blue screen of death? The fat model of the PS3 was also very prone to heat issues. Maybe it's the fact that there's basically 3 consoles squished inside one model, but here's what the overheating looks like. Now, onto the generation of PlayStation that made my inner Sony fan just shatter to pieces. The PS4. Now, this console's release model is pretty shite. Prone to heat problems just like the fat PS3. It was loud. Extremely slow hard drive with not a whole lot of space, painful download speeds, and had software issues like the blue light of death, which were ironed out later. There is also a red light of death, or a line of death, I guess you could say. But hey, at least it doesn't cost $600 like the PS3 did on launch. But anyways, here's the overheat screen. But the PS4 does kind of have a red screen, kind of doesn't. It's complicated, as there was one image that was uploaded to Reddit, and also only one video. Though we don't know the legitimacy of either of these, but I want to believe that there is one, so it's really me. Now that's all I want to say about the PS4, but I do want to touch on the PS5, only one thing really. That would be the incompatible disc screen. I mean, it's not even really a screen, it's more just an image on the background. But I believe it resembles the PS2 red screen a great bit, especially since this was the last time Sony had made something intentionally like this since the PS2. And while this console is yet to have an actual red screen discovered, or even have one, I would like to share the last red screen that Sony made in its place, that being for the PSP. Though that's all for PlayStation, but what about the other consoles?
Alert. I'm detecting Covenant movement.
We all know and love the original Xbox, the home of Halo and a bunch of other strange but wonderful experiences, such as that wacky-ass Half-Life 2 port, if anyone remembers that one. There was even a port of Jet Set Radio, which is really rad, and even original games such as Fusion Frenzy. This was, however, the first widescreen console to hit the market, which is pretty cool and interesting. But the most unique aspect to this console is how alien it sounds and feels to control the menus, and it truly has an aura unlike any other. I think most people know about this fact, but I would like to share the home menu ambience anyways, because I really like all the off-putting yet fucking awesome sounds that were used when you left the console on for a period of time. The menu had fantastic sound design. I bet the team who worked on this thought that people wouldn't resell their console if they made it sound like it would murder its user for doing so. For the actual errors, there is an abundant amount of small pop-ups that just warn you of minor things, which I feel isn't worth going to full detail. But the most interesting things to me are the kill screens. Before I get into that, however, you remember the red rings of death for the Xbox 360? This console has something similar. There are green, orange, and red rings of death. The orange ring of death is actually the easiest one to trigger and is actually pretty funny, as you only need to completely forget about the video output and not plug it into a TV to trigger this. And the green ring of death is caused when you have corrupted BIOS. And lastly, the red light of death is probably the worst, as you have to have something like a dead GPU or dead fans. But for the kill screens, they are numbered 1 through 21. And they aren't anything like the PS2 red screen, where it was way more interesting with visuals, but they're more akin to the PS1 and PS3 red screens, where it's just art with text over it. But the silence and mostly black screen and general matrix looking shit really adds to it. I quite like it personally. Next, the Xbox 360. I find it very interesting how the console's dashboard has changed 4 times over the years. I think that's the most for any console ever. Though the last two are practically the same thing, to be honest. I personally liked the second iteration the most, but I think it may just be nostalgia bias. But to the actual errors, with the red rings of death, did you know that depending on which lights are triggered, it means something different? This console also surprisingly has a kill screen. I would say it's like a combination of the original Xboxes and a Wii's kill screen. Then lastly, here's what it looks like when your console overheats. Moving up to the Xbox One, there's only two things I want to talk about. And it seems the more modern consoles really have no interesting errors at all, but I guess that's to be expected honestly. So firstly, there is this one error called the green screen of death, which is just when the console gets stuck on the startup screen. This one is allegedly very easy to fix, though I wouldn't know. Speaking of similarities, there's an error screen on the Xbox One that really resembles the Windows 10/11 blue screen menu. I guess Microsoft just thought it would work for that as well, which fair enough, but I find it very interesting though. But speaking of blue screens, I think that would make a good seg. So, about blue screens, they have like this whole ass history. So I'm just gonna show the earliest ones and then the newest ones. Also, prepare to hear the words blue screen in Windows a lot. This is the alleged first blue screen, the OG if you will. There's nothing much to say about it, however. Then there was this one used for Windows 9X, 95, and 98. Still nothing noteworthy. And this was the blue screen used for Windows 2000. Then this was the blue screen used for Windows XP, Windows Vista, and Windows 7. And this was the first one I ever saw because Windows 7 was my first OS that I ever used when I was younger. Then this one's the one we all know and hate. And it is the one Microsoft's probably going to use from now on. This was used for Windows 8, 8.1, and Windows 10. But you know, what's with the color of the blue screen? I mean, it's blue, yeah, obviously, but the tone changes most of the time between operating systems, which I find really interesting. Is the specific tone of blue selected with a specific reason? I imagine the developers didn't think about it much at all when blue screens were first made, but with the lighter color that the recent one uses, does Microsoft think the lighter color makes it less spooky or something? Who knows? But I gotta say, when you encounter your first blue screen, it can really invoke a feeling of panic, dread, or even guilt, especially if it's a computer that several people are using. Even the Windows 10/11 blue screen will still scare the shit out of you for the first time, before the blue screens just become a huge annoyance inevitably. Anyways, enough of that. I want to talk a bit about the GameCube and the Wii for now. The GameCube's menu really has that same space war that the PS2 went for, though it goes in its own direction. Like the little cubes that make up things as you go through the menus, the slow ethereal theme that plays in the background, and that iconic and nostalgic startup sequence really makes this console's home menu something really special. I just really appreciate this console even if I never owned one myself. And I've played it many times at a few friends' houses before, and it always brought good times. This console has very few errors, however. I've only managed to find 5 errors in total. To start, if there is a connection problem with the Game Boy player, it does this. That dum sound with the red text background is the same format used for most of these. Yet this one error is caused when you have a connection problem with your controller, which is like, damn, it's as if the console just dropped a whole piano on you for something so minor. Then here is the discrete error for this console, and then just a general yet critical error. And lastly, there is this kill screen for this console with white text over a black background, which seems to be a recurring theme here. Though that's everything for the GameCube, I quite like how this console shows its errors. Now for the Wii, I'm just going to showcase a few errors. Firstly, here's a clip of a disc-related error screen. Then here's an example of the corrupted system file screen. And here's another variant to this error screen. And lastly, a blue kill screen. But that's all I could really find on the Wii. I'm sure there's a lot more out there though. The last thing I wanted to mention and talk about is this one really strange audio warning that was built into most of the Sega CD game discs at the time. Basically, it was this one audio warning that was intended to spook any person who tried playing the game disc in a normal CD player by using this unnerving distorted guitar in the background, as some female voice warned you about how the game data in the CD can harm your speakers if you tried playing it as a music disc in a normal CD player. Though I think it's a very good example of that off-putting feeling you can get when electronic or software expresses that something is wrong. But anyways, enjoy this really stupid edit I made using the same audio warning.
Hey, want to listen to some tunes?
Warning, this disc is for use with a Sega CD system only. This disc contains CD-ROM data and is not for audio use. Please press stop on your disc player now. This disc contains CD-ROM data that may damage your audio system. Please stop playing this disc immediately.
Well, that was something. This was my first video essay, I guess you could say, although I just rambled about something that really interests me and I'm just oddly passionate about. I hope it was enjoyable or watchable though. But if I were to make another video like this, it'd definitely be better and have a better topic too. I have for sure learned so much from this project though, even if it took me forever to get around to finishing it. I did, however, just end up listing a lot of errors instead of going into detail about them like I planned, but this video would have been way longer. Most of them just aren't much to talk about anyways. That's all though. Thank you for sticking around and watching, and have a good one.